Hello and welcome to a new After Effects tutorial. My name is Alex. So today we're going to cover a little bit of Cinema 4D Lite as much as I know. Now I have Cinema 4D Studio on my computer, so I don't really know what is included all with Cinema 4D Lite and what's left off, but we'll make the best of it. So I want to create something very simple, kind of give you a basic overall for it to see how you can maybe apply this to some videos that you may be using for some corporate videos and maybe something that you're going to be using in your church, maybe announcement video. So we're going to kind of focus on maybe this announcement video idea and go through some basic stuff. So the first thing I'm going to do, I open up After Effects and I'm going to go to New Composition and we'll just make this 1920 by 1080 and we'll just keep it. Let's do maybe 49 seconds or so. That's fine. It's going to give me this basic composition here. I can toggle this on and off there so we can see that. So the next thing I want to do is just go and open up Cinema 4D Lite. So I need to go to File, New, Maxon Cinema 4D File. So this is what you should see under File for you. And then we're going to make, and this is kind of what we're going to make here. So this is my test. So just have a folder here that I made, Cinema 4D Lite folder, and we'll call this Announcement Test. So once you hit save, Cinema 4D will open up, and this is this is Studio R19, but we will pretend like it's Cinema 4D Lite and try to use some of the very basic features on it. Okay, so Cinema 4D opens up, and this is what you're looking at. So to give you an idea of what all this is, over here, this is your main viewer. This is where all your animation will be taking place. This is sort of like just a blank canvas, empty environment here. Over to the right is where you'll have all of your layers, much like a Photoshop layer panel here. And down here will be all of your just basically like settings for that particular layer or your material that you may add to some text or some backgrounds and things like that. Down here at the bottom will be your materials panel where you can add different textures and colors and things. And this here is your timeline where we'll be adding a few keyframes here and there. So up here at the top, we have a bunch of different things. These are sort of your cursors. This is to move things around. This is to scale them. This is to rotate. Some selections if you're going to be selecting certain polygons. We'll get into that in a minute. I don't really ever use these hardly at all. And then we have some render settings here. So here's you're gonna find a bunch of your settings, which we'll get into in a minute. Then you have sort of a render preview. And then you can render out the entire project into an image sequence or something like that. Here you'll have your sort of your polygons. So if you click and hold this, you will see a bunch of options. I don't know how many you have here as far as Cinema 4D Lite's concerned, but I'm sure you have some of the basic ones, if not all of these. Here is your pen tool. There's a bunch of different options here we can be drawing. Basically, they're called splines in Cinema 4D, but they're really just basically like paths that you would find inside of Illustrator or something like that. In this category, we have a few things that will be creating some 3D objects based on those splines or those paths that you'll have. So we'll be using some text splines and adding an extrude to them to try to give that text some depth, and we'll get into that in a second. Here's just some deformers that you can use to bend any sort of polygons or objects. You can really see the example here and how they're used, and we'll maybe mess with some of that. Here you probably won't get into much of this today. We have our cameras here, which I think you may just have two here, but really I just use this main camera. And then we have lighting options, which I believe you have most of these. So this will be a great start to get into creating some lighting. We will get into some of these options up here, such as MoGraph and things in a bit, but let's just start with the basics. So the idea I have in my head of how to apply this to something like an announcement video would be to make a bunch of planes, which are just a 1920 by 1080 plane, and sort of have those slide in and out with some basic 3D text on top of those with some nice lighting. And then we'll talk about how to put a sort of an object in there that we can then translate in After Effects to say, hey, here's where text should go, and then we can just import text in After Effects without having to come back to Cinema 4D and just have a nice looking image there. So I'm going to do basically two examples of a slide and transitions with a camera movement and some lighting, and then we'll get into how to get it back to After Effects. So the first thing I want to do is set up a 1920 by 1080 document, which is what we want to create. So I'm going to go back to those render settings here, and here in the output I can change my width to 1920 and the height to 1080. We can go and change some of these ratings here. So usually I do 24 frames a second, and then if you're current, this is really just how long you want your video to be. So I think mine was like 49 seconds, so we'll just say that for now. Resolution 72 is fine. And then you go to the save. I don't think you have this option inside of Cinema 4D Lite, but that's okay. We don't have to do all this inside of Cinema. We can do all the exporting in After Effects. And we'll get into a couple of other things here later on. So let's go ahead and close that out. That basically just sets up our 1920 by 1080 document. So I'm going to go over here and drag this up. You can see this dark gray area and this light gray area. I'm going to drag this up to cover up that dark gray area so that I know exactly where my frame is. So 1920 by 1080 here. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a plane object. So I'm going to go up here to where this cube is, click on this cube, and I'm going to go down to plane right here. That's just going to make a nice flat square. This is set to inches right now, so really you can make this 16 by 9 inches and it'll keep the same proportions. So I'm going to click off of that. Now it's super small, but I can click on the plane object, and again, these are really your settings for that object. We changed our width and our height, and you can add segments. Let me scale this up a little bit. So to scale, what I do is I hit T on the keyboard, and that's going to give you these axes here that you can scale up. So when the little square, little cube is on the end of those, that means you're in scaling mode. So I can just click and drag my mouse in this viewport and scale it up. Okay, so if I wanted to see how many segments are in it, we don't really need to get into this today, but you have width segments, and that's going to be here in the display settings. I can go to garage shading and lines, and it'll show that I have 20 segments on one side and 20 segments on the other side. So I could change this to 5 and 10 and change those. So this really matters when you're getting into deforming this object, but we probably won't get into that today. So we can just leave that as is. But the general rule of thumb within After Effects is the more polygons you have, which are what these little grids are, these little shapes inside of here, will determine how long it will be to render. So here we're totally safe, but as soon as you start getting into big models, the more polygons and detail that you have there, the longer it will take to render. So now we have 1620 or 16 by 9 panel, and now we can want to try to center this up to be dead center of my screen. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm actually going to grab a camera. So I'm going to click on the camera, go to camera here, and that's going to make a new camera up here. So I'm not looking through the camera yet until I click on this little square icon here. When I click on that, now I'm viewing through the camera. And you can see down here at the bottom, we have a ton of options here that you can start messing around with and playing around with. We're not going to get into a lot of these, and again, I don't know how much you see on Cinema 4D Lite, but I do know that you at least get a camera. So the thing I'm going to do first is I'm going to change my camera position to be looking directly at this plane. So I'm going to click on coordinates, and this is fine here. We don't really need to worry about that yet, but you can see the rotation. So this is your position, scale, and rotation, and I want to change this to be completely square on this panel. So I don't want a 45-degree angle, so I'm going to hit 0 on that. And I think I need this to be a negative 90 degrees. And now you can see that my plane has disappeared. That's just because my camera is looking in a different direction. But if I go over to, with my camera selected, if I go over here and I hold down 1 on the keyboard and I click and drag, I can start moving my camera around. You can't really see anything, but now I'm going to scroll back on my mouse button a little bit. And now I can see my plane is right here in space. So again, I'm using 1 to move. You can use 2 to sort of zoom in, or you can use 3 to sort of pivot your rotation. I use these a lot. Instead of going up here, clicking all these buttons, I just use 1, 2, and 3. So I changed my rotation. Let me change that back. So that was negative 90. And this should be 0. Okay, now I know I'm dead center. I need to move into that plane. So I'm going to hold down 1, zoom in here, kind of put it on that little yellow crosshair, zoom in, and just get it close. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I'm going to just make sure my screen is covered. Okay, so something like that is totally fine. All right, so just to give you an idea of what's happening, I can turn off the camera viewport here. And now if I zoom out using the scroll button on my mouse, you can see I have a camera and it's looking right down at this plane here. So the next thing I want to do is let's give this plane a little bit of color. So if I wanted to see what this looks like right now, I could click on the render view button here, or you can hit Command R, I believe, and it'll render out your viewport. So right now, not a whole lot going on. So let's add a little bit of color to it. So to do that, I'm going to go to down here. I'm going to go to Create. I'm going to go to New Material. And this brings up some options over here. or you can double click on this here and you'll have a lot of options inside of your materials here. For this, we're just going to keep it very basic and not going into anything too crazy. So we're going to give it some color. The way you can make it a solid color here, we're going to add a gradient, and I believe you can do this as well, I hope. But where you see texture here, you can click on this little triangle and you have a bunch of options. So I'm just going to click on gradient, and now I can click in this gradient square. And this is a lot like Photoshop. You just kind of select your colors here. So we're going to do like a red. I need to make sure my turned up here. There we go. Hit OK. Get some of that orange in there. Then you can change the direction of the gradient. Won't go into this a whole lot either, but let's just go like a diagonal. And that looks pretty good. So you can go in and change a lot of settings here. Again, not sure what you have, but reflectance, I believe you may have. You can change how much that surface is reflective. And there's all sorts of settings in there as well. So we can close this for now. And all I need to do is just drag my new material right here and drop it onto there. And boom, now I have some nice color. If I render it out, I have a nice clean color. All right. Now let's add a text layer. So the next thing I want to do, I don't believe you have, if you go to the MoGraph tab and you go down to Mode Text, I don't think you're going to have this option. So don't worry about that. What we're going to do is go to the little pen tool here, and we're going to do a text spline. So we're going to select that. And this is going to give you a text layer here that's kind of got an outline on it. And then I'm going to click on text. And here we can change, I'm going to go to object right here. Click there. And here I can change, you know, the sizing and the font style and all that good stuff. So I'm going to click on font. And for me, for some odd reason, probably because I have a lot of fonts on my computer, whenever I click on font to change it, it takes forever for it to sort of update all the fonts inside of the program for me to see. So I just kind of have to wait for it to update there. All right, so my font thing is finally loaded in here. So it only has to do that once every time I open the project, but you know, it's just kind of is what it is. So I'm going to scroll up and just select the font that we use. You can obviously use any font you want, but I clearly have more than I need. So I'm doing Acrom extra bold. Now you can see it's right there. So I'm just going to go in here and type in welcome and period. So right here is where you would put your input for your text. So once you click off that, it'll update. And everything else looks pretty good. You can change the vertical spacing, horizontal spacing. Won't get into too much of that. You can also change the kerning by letter. Won't get into that too much either, but feel free to play with it. So now what we need to do is give this some depth. Now before you, make sure that you don't go start moving it around or rotating it too much, especially rotating, because if you rotate it and then you add this extrude nerve, it'll be all flat and weird. Just go ahead and add the extrude nerve to it now. So you're probably wondering, what are you talking about? And that is up here in this little panel here. Let's see, this one. Let's see, there we go. This panel here, we want the extrude nerve. So it's NURBS. I don't remember what that stands for, but it's a funny word and I have to say it a lot. But here is the extrude nerve, and this is the one we want. So I'm going to click on that. It adds it over here to our panel. And so now I just need to grab the text spline and drop it. You have that little down arrow, which means it's going to make it a child of this layer. Let go of that, and now we have some 3D depth to our text. Okay, so now let's get this thing into place. And I'm going to be messing with the extrude layer now. I can kind of drop that down, and I want to rotate this and place it on my plane. So I'm going to hit R on the keyboard. That's going to give me this rotate tool, and I can click and rotate it there. And I'm holding down Shift so that it stays sort of in multiples of 10. You can see that little number right there. As far as the degrees go, so I want to do exactly 90 degrees. Then I'm going to hit E on the keyboard. So basically R is your rotation and E is your position and S is your scale. So I have E set there, so I'm going to slide that up. You can move this anywhere you want. I try to use the arrows as much as possible. I'm coming down here, and this looks good. So now I need to scale this way down. You can do it just by hitting S on the keyboard. Sorry, S is not scale, T is scale. And you can scale it down that way, or you can scale it within your text right here. So the height, I can make it like 15 and then move it around that way. So this looks good. Hit E on the keyboard or my move tool. With that extrude selected, I'm going to just kind of move it around. Just get it, just get it into place. So you know you're on the right axis when that arrow lights up It's a white. So I want to get my text right on top of it there. Okay, so now this text, if I hit render, it looks like that. It looks pretty plain Jane. But let's add a little bit of color to this as well, so I can make a new material. And we'll just go ahead and drag this one on here. And I'm going to make this pretty much white. So I'm going to go back to the color panel here, and I'm going to make this pretty much white, a little off-white. Hit OK. All right, so the next thing I want to do, which I hope you have, is adding a few caps to these text layers. So I can go to the cap tab up here for the extrude NURB, and then go to start and end. So start and end is basically the front and back. So I'm going to go to cap, and I'm going to go to fillet cap, and you can see it adds this crazy looking kind of bevel to the text. But I want to make these steps, which is sort of the amount of divisions it's going to put right here. We'll make this somewhere around like 5. It kind of rounds it off a little bit. We want to make this pretty small, so I'm going to do like 1.25. Let's go 0.15. That looks good for now. And I'm going to make sure that my text is, you don't have to do this, but I'm going to make sure my text is right on top of the, I don't want it cutting through, I'm going to put it right on top. That'll affect the shadows and stuff later. Okay, so now we have this text layer. Can hit render. Now we have some rounded edges in there, but it still seems pretty flat, and that's mainly because we don't have any lighting in the scene. So Cinema 4D puts a default light in here under options. I think you can just turn that off. It's probably be black. Yeah. So with that off, we can now add it. You can leave that on. It'll turn off once you add an actual light, but we're just going to go ahead and add. So I can add a bunch of different lights, but I'm just going to cover a couple of these. So let's just do like an area light, and you can see it puts this little option in here, and now I have this big square. This is sort of like a light panel, so if I move this up, you can see it changing right there. And if I now render out, let's see what it looks like. Now we're getting something, we're getting some shadows. So I'm going to rotate this all the way around, somewhere around in here. I'm going to hit E on the keyboard, and I'm just moving this around. I'm just going to put it like right above the plate there. Give it an idea of what I'm rendering out. So there's sort of what that looks like, and obviously that's not great. You can go into your lighting settings and start changing maybe the color tone of that light a little bit. You can use some color to it. You can bump up the intensity. You can add some shadows. Let's do like a soft shadow. Now we're getting some shadows in there, which is pretty cool. But I'm going to turn this light off, I think, for now. I'm going to do a, let's go to infinite light. And this is really kind of give you a sort of a sunlight vibe. This light can be anywhere, but the only thing that really matters is where you rotate it. So I'm just going to rotate, and you can see that white line coming from it. That's really the direction that it's coming from. So let's just do it somewhere like this. And again, it doesn't matter where that light is. You're just talking about the direction of the light. So if I hit render, and we need to add some shadows to that. So I'm going to shadow, and let's do area shadows. So now we're getting some really harsh shadows. You can go into the shadow and turn that down if you want. You could change the color to something along that line. Okay. So now we're getting some shadows there. That's kind of cool looking. Okay, so let's just go with something like that. Maybe let's add another light. Let's not do that one. Let's do an area light, and we'll add the shadows back on. So I'm going to go to the light details. Let's see, shadow, and we'll do a soft shadow, and we'll rotate it maybe. This is maybe just to soften up those shadows just a little bit. Okay. Turn that down a pretty good bit as well. So the next thing I'm going to add is an effect to the entire thing called ambient occlusion. This is a sort of a, I don't know what the fancy definition is for it, but it basically just gives a little more detail to your shadows, especially in like the corners, and it starts looking a lot more realistic. So if you go to your render settings, which are right up here, little gear there, and you go to effect, and then you go to ambient occlusion. Then that's that. You can go ahead and adjust some of these settings here if you need to. Basically, the lower these get, the lower the quality, but also the faster the render. So you got to sort of find a balance there. We won't get into all that yet. We'll just go with the basic. So now if I hit render, you see my shadows get a little bit more detail in there, and it's starting to look a little bit better. I might want to go into my light here and adjust the color of my shadow as well. Go back to some sort of reddish pink. See if that helps a little bit. I think maybe my extrude is a little bit too deep, so I'm going to go into the object tab, and this is the thickness of that extrude. So I'm going to go to like 1.5, and let's render that and see if I can pull it a little closer to that panel there, somewhere around in there. Let's go into our material, our pink material, and we can play with some of the reflections a little bit. Let's see. Again, I don't know how much of these you have, but you can at least play with the settings that you see. And it changes just the specular highlight on some of these things. You can just toy, basically, you know, I just toy around with settings until it feels like it's getting somewhere that I like. But let's see if we can see a reflection in this panel. So I'm going to just grab a sphere, and we will turn it way down. Let's get off of our camera, pull that up. Let's see if we can see that reflection of the sphere in there. So we see a shadow. Let's see if we can get a really good reflection. Your settings are probably pretty basic, where we're getting some of the light reflections in there. I bet if I were to add this. So you can see the difference once I add the texture to the circle or the sphere. You can start seeing a lot of the reflections in there, and even in the panel. Really, a flat surface is going to have a hard time creating reflections if it doesn't have anything to reflect off of, or there's no bend in it. You're not going to see like these cool reflections that you have here. We'll just delete that for now. We know that our layer is reflecting a little bit. We're just going to bump that down some. It's so intense because reflections will add a lot to your render time. But we'll go with this. I think this will work for now. All right, so I'll pause it for a second, mess around with a few settings. I have my light, just the area light, or the infinite light, which is sort of that sunlight. I bumped my shadow down to 50% with a kind of that reddish, dark red color. Made it area shadows, and went into my texture because I wasn't liking the way the lighting was hitting the texture. So originally I had this here. Let me just turn this off. I had 0 luminance on there, and it was getting these nasty looking, just black shadows here. And was feeling a little sloppy. So if you go to luminance, I hope you have that, and turn that on. If you don't, sorry about that. And I'm just going to bump up that color a little bit so that the dark areas will pick up some of that that pink from the background a little bit. So now it feels a little more realistic in there. That I could even go to the reflectance as well and bump up that reflection strength. Pull down the roughness some. And I'm going to get some reflections on that text, as well as on those on the little beveled edges that we added. So I can bump up the specular strength. See some more of those rounded edges there. Let's go to legacy. Yours probably, if you do have this, you're probably set to legacy, which is pretty similar. So we'll turn it on roughness. So that's already looking a lot better. So if you need to see kind of what that looks like, I'm going to zoom way into it. And we'll sort of change our angle here a little bit. Now you can get a cool idea of what this looks like. And I hope yours has all these settings. So that's looking so much better. All right, so let's move on here. Let's I'm just going to drop that down just a little bit. Right around there. Just hovering off the top of that. Perfect. That's looking great. Let's talk about some really basic animation, just some position and rotation and things like that. So I'm just going to take my extrude and animate it into place. So let's put it in the center. Now, if you don't like how this little extrude, your axis is right here, way down here, away from the text, you can go to this option here, click on that, and move that where that axis actually, the center is for your text layer. Now I'm going to turn that back off, and now I should be able to move it from there. So that looks good. The next thing I'm going to do is just have this maybe come down from the top. So I want to set a keyframe for where it is right now. So I'm going to, here's my timeline. So You can change the, this is seconds, mine's set on seconds. You can change your preference. It may say frames. You can go up to edit and preferences and change to seconds. I just understand a little better. So I'm gonna make this maybe just 25. And then I need to drag that out so I can see the whole timeline. You can set it wherever you want, but we'll go to maybe about here, about 2 seconds in, and I'm going to set a keyframe. So to set a keyframe, I'm going to go down here to this little key button, and basically it's saying I'm going to set a keyframe for the position, the scale, the rotation, the parameters, as well as this PLA, which you don't have to worry about that. That one's turned off for now. So really, you're just really worried about the position and rotation. If you don't want to set for all these, you can just turn them off. You can just do the position. So we will just worry about the position. That's fine. So I'm going to go to, let's see, we're at about 48 seconds, or sorry, about 48 frames. And I'm going to, as long as this one is selected, I'm going to hit this little key button, and that's going to set this little blue keyframe. Kind of hard to see, but you can see it right there. Okay. And then I'm going to go back to 0. And now I want to move this all the way up. Clicking that Y-axis, I'm going to put it all the way up there. And now I'm going to click this keyframe again. And now if I hit play, my text comes into play. So if you want to adjust the sort of the speed graph, if you will, like you would in After Effects, I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to go down to show F curves. And here's sort of your speed graph. And you can just maybe highlight all of it. And I'm going to click this little handle here, hold down Command or Control, or yeah, Command, I guess, and slide that over. And I'm going to highlight just these here. You can change your view all right here, but these are the ones that are selected. And then I'm going to click and drag that. So it's sort of super fast and it slowly comes into place. So we'll take a look at this. All right, good enough. All right, so there is our welcome slide.